We're live.
I hope
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Hi.
I forgot.
Because
Because on your computer, where to see if people are here. What?
Is it up here?
Yes, I see it now.
Okay. Hold on. Can I put it on the internet?
Yes.
Am I allowed to have a slow start to the stream?
Yeah. There's always sort of a slow start to the stream as people filter in, but we've got some folks here. Hi, Shiko. Shiko's always here.
Hello.
I appreciate you being here. Who else is here? Everyone say hello. It's Friday. How's the end of your week going? Or maybe not the end, depending on what your week is like. How's the end of your week, Miriam?
Good. Too warm, but good. I'm excited for a
Did
weekend.
Darcy leave us?
Darcy immediately abandoned us. We
I
didn't
know.
go live, and she sprinted out of the room.
I know certainly some people are here for Darcy.
We will have to find her and collect her, but she also knows what happens when we start live streaming.
Yeah. Then I'm surprised she's not jumping up.
I know, right? Well, we didn't get any treats from her from the fridge, so.
Hello. Can everybody hear us okay? How's everything technically? Because I am usually doing this like webcam directly into the streaming software, and now we are here with the whole camera set up and microphones and everything.
Yeah, hopefully it sounds okay. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the Hopepunk Book Club, everyone. Okay, everyone. It seems like the tech is going good.
Audio, video, okay, amazing.
All right.
Fine.
And of course, I always take off my book jackets. And then now I'm here at Miriam's apartment to talk about this book, and I left my book jacket at home. So we're reading The Day the World Stopped Shopping. Yeah, The Day the World Stopped Shopping by JB Mackinnon. And we're going to talk about what this made us believe about the future. So for folks who didn't get a chance to read it, that's totally cool. You can always hang out here. But this is a book that sort of looks at, the question is the day the world stopped shopping. What if we all decreased our consumer behavior dramatically? And it's not even to zero. It's just, I think that originally he says it's like 20, if you cut it 25%.
Yeah, a lot of the examples are 25%. And
so
then at the end, he's just like, 5% would be great.
Yeah, 5% would be returning to like 5 years ago, which is like a frightening thing to think that it is increased that much that fast. But if we, cut our consumption habits by 1/4, what impacts would that have on the world? Turns out a lot.
So many.
And a lot of them, I think, are on the climate. If people saw the video that I uploaded last night, where Miriam and I talk about what we know about the future of climate change and what we don't know and what we can learn from that. I have to remember to look at the camera because with the camera, I've just been staring down at my laptop. We were talking about kind of how we can imagine different futures for the climate. And so this is a look into one of those futures where we make an adjustment in our consumption, and all the different things that consumption can encompass.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else I missed that people should know about this book?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think.
Right. Well, I'm going to ask you the question in the Hopepunk Book Club, Miriam, which is, what did this book make you believe about the future? And while you think of your answer, I want folks in the comments, if you read the book, to leave your answers to that question as well, and we can talk about them on stream. Sorry, I noticed I had a piece of hair in my mouth.
Okay, so I knew this question was coming, and I tried to come up with an answer for it. And I think the best I can do is I have a hope for the future if people are thinking more deeply about consumption. Perhaps I'm not as optimistic as we can actually start decreasing it right away. I would love that. But I think a benefit and a thoughtfulness of this book gave me was just thinking about if people are thinking more about the stuff they're buying, that alone probably will have some sort of meaningful impact, at least one can hope. So just a space where people are thoughtful and attention about the things they bring into their lives. Because I do think he does a really good job of discussing not just what shopping is, but like what consumption is in total. And so bringing both, buying that t-shirt, but also every time you turn on the air conditioner, every time you plug in a phone, those are all different types of consumption. And it gets a little blurry around what's necessary and what is just kind of an additional bonus that you don't really think about, don't really need.
Yeah.
Is that an adequate answer to that question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. It's so something that you mentioned that I was thinking about reading through this book a lot, especially because over the past several months, I've been trying to alter my own personal consumer behavior, and sort of like struggling with it more than I expected to. Being like, oh, I can't get myself a little treat when I'm feeling bad, and I have to actually learn how to cope with this in another way. And sort of being frustrated that I was struggling with it. And it's like being thoughtful and actually changing my actions isn't necessarily the same thing. I'm just maybe like buying as much but feeling guiltier. And so like, what does that mean, and how can I kind of, adjust my own personal behavior? And something that I found interesting in this book, especially like in the conclusion where he's talking about, is this like individual changes in consumer behavior have been happening throughout history. Like there's always been like a subculture that's anti-consumer, but it's never been mainstream. And so me saying I'm just going to shop less is not going to create the impacts that, are talked about in this book, where the entire world consumes 25% less. Because it's never going to be the entire world that just voluntarily chooses to do it because like their values tell them to. So, I kind of have been frustrated with myself for not being able to do it on an individual level. And I don't think he's trying to say this excuses you from doing it on an individual level. It's more so just saying like, hey, do it to get in line with your own values, which is something that we've talked about in this channel a lot. It's just like, do it to at least be consistent with what you believe for yourself, but that it can sort of be a way into thinking about what changes we need to make more structurally to make it more of a community-wide change.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I also think he does an interesting job through the 4 sections, sort of tackling, he does a good job covering the things that individuals are doing and have done historically, and touches on at the very end in the epilogue of perhaps policy pushes that we can have and sort of encapsulating externalities and whatnot. But I am curious in the scope of the nexus of like individual things and then corporate things and then policy things. I do think he spends quite a bit of time discussing this kind of not green growth necessarily, but like green degrowth.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on that. And whether or not, because he, at least in my reading of it, he did not seem to come down on whether or not he thought it was a good thing or a bad thing. Yeah, all these companies that are, I've forgotten all the vocabulary words he used.
Yeah. Well,
like their advertising
it's interesting
choices.
because like just before we came on stream, and definitely like let us know your thoughts in the chat too. But right before we turned the stream on, we were like, yeah, I'll talk about this and you'll talk about that. And we realized that we had very different readings of the same text, which is that, there are many examples throughout the book where the author's talking about like, here's a community or a country or a town or whatever that experienced a period of degrowth. And he never actually uses the word degrowth in the book, I think, but a period of dramatically reduced consumption, and here are the different consequences of that and how they adapted to those changes. And Miriam was like, he never gives an example where something terrible doesn't happen. And I was like, that was not my interpretation of that at all. Well, I'll let you speak for yourself in a second, but you did ask me a question. And I think that what's interesting and cool about this book is that it is very honest that not every change that we're going to go through is in a world of degrowth is going to be comfortable. And that, it's not like we flip a switch, he's like, all right, day one, here's what happens. Not a whole lot changes on day one. People are maybe freaking out because their store is empty that day or whatever, but you're not going to have any less clothes in your closet on day one.
Right.
But that in sort of a long term, people lose their jobs. Like there's things, the way that the economy is tied to endless growth, that gets shaken up and that has consequences. And some of those consequences are unpleasant. But I think that what's important to remember is like the consequences of not doing it are also unpleasant. like continuing to accelerate climate change is not gonna be like a chill and, calm and, status quo future where none of us have to adjust to a change.
For sure.
And so I think it's important to be honest about that so that we don't say, all right, day one, we flipped the switch and now we all live in that like Solarpunk Chobani commercial. But, we're going to have to learn to get through this discomfort and this challenge in order to get to a better place. Because the alternative is also like, not going to be comfortable.
Yeah. And I think to defend my original comment that none of you heard, so it's a little bit hearsay here, but my point was not the difficult stuff that comes afterward when we have stopped shopping. My frustration and my difficulty when I was coming up with an answer to your first question is because of how history has historied, we have just kept buying more and buying more and making more and making more. So there are all of the examples that he could go to talk about times when they have consumed less is precipitated by a bad thing happening. So he spends a lot of time using COVID as this example of a lot of consumerism decreased during the pandemic, especially during the initial bit of the pandemic. And that wasn't a choice that people made. Right. So like when I am trying to build my framework for the future, I love it when there's human agency and choice. And so the thing that I had a hard time with this book is so many of the examples, and I'm trying to think if there were any counter examples at this point, and let me know if there are not the people who decided to consume less with the exception of like the really rich people in Seattle. But it was all like everybody got sick. The entire economy crumbled, something really bad happened, and then this less consuming nature came out of it. And it's possible that just we don't have history to look to for this future, and that's just hard for me.
Sorry, I was flipping through the book and I was trying to find it and the reason that this might not come to you is because it was one of the very first examples is when he goes to Ecuador. And I was looking for that because Jared in the comments was like, does the author mention the global south and the poorest within those countries? Because good job, thank you.
I figured out. It's really hard.
And I think that one of the things that he does point out kind of later in the book is like one great goal would be to start as like a 5% reduction in consumption in the richest countries,
right?
Because we're the ones who are consuming too much. And so one of the things that he does is like there's I forget the term for it, but basically like, when you hear the stat of like we're consuming at a rate that we would need 5 Earths to support. And so he is looking at, different, you can sort of dial down. If everybody lived like it was the US, it would take 12 Earths to support. And then he's like, what's that many?
Yeah. Isn't 5?
5 is if like the current globe is living.
Right. I should have written this down.
But anyway, if it was the US, it would be even more if everybody consumed at the rate that the US does. And then he's like, what countries are consuming at a rate of 1 Earth, right? If we all modeled our lifestyle after their lifestyle, we would be consuming what 1 Earth could support. And one of those countries is Ecuador. And so he goes to Ecuador and he's like, all right, what are, how are people living in Ecuador? And one of the things that he says is like, I think that people have this idea of an end to consumption is just, now we're all kind of like running around through the forest naked and like eating sticks. I don't know. But he's like, all right, I went to Ecuador. People have phones, but they don't replace them every 2 years. People might have 1 TV in their house, but not a TV in every room. There might be 1 car for the family rather than a car for every person. And so it's like, it's not even, I don't know, like this 1 Earth lifestyle is like not, I think, as dramatically far off as people would imagine, like, oh, I guess none of us can ever have a television again. Like that's not
right.
That's not true. But I thought that was a good example of, again, I think it's less like choice. And I think part of the reason that he does this is to critique the people in Seattle, or like the people, like literally those people are us. Those people are like, you know, well-to-do upper middle class people who are like, you know what? I feel stressed out by all this stuff. I'm going to choose to have less, right?
Shed all this mortal baggage.
Yeah. The voluntary simplicity, right? Which is like a very privileged, you know, way to come at this. Do you want to,
you want me to hide it?
Well, not hide it, but just, we don't need to keep it on screen.
The button says hide. I apologize, Jared.
But I think that he's trying to critique that perspective and say, like, that perspective is never going to be the large majority of people. And we shouldn't necessarily look to people who are choosing that lifestyle as the model that everybody else should follow, because they come from a pretty unique circumstance of like, I have too much and I think that I should have less.
I think he was too nice to them, frankly. I know he was critiquing it, but it's like,
read me. But this is you know, Ecuador is an example where it wasn't like, and the country was plunged into a depression by an economic crisis, like the Finland chapter, for example. Or COVID hit the world. But it's just sort of like, hey, this is sort of a standard of living that I think most of us would find unobjectionable, that would be in line with what the planet can support. And so it's not necessarily by choice, in the sense that, like, as he points out in a lot of these examples, like, we really have to avoid the trap of being like, oh yeah, those noble people who are poorer than me and consume way less, and they're happy. They have nothing, but they have everything. You know, like that. Like, let's not do that. But that's still, you know, an example that we can look to of what this could actually look like.
Yeah, I do think that you're right. That does provide a good example of getting there without, you know, some kind of disaster that's happening. But I guess it still is difficult for me to conceptualize, because he describes how Ecuador got there as like, that is the development of Ecuador. How do you get the people who have shot past that, the world that has shot past that, the parts of the world that have shot past, all the Europe, the Canadas, the USs of the world, to go back in that direction?
Yeah, I think the Japan chapter is probably the best example of that. And that was also caused by an economic depression.
Exactly. And so
it's an economic depression that was now, I guess, when was the 80s, 40 years ago.
Right. And like, they've built something in its place that seems really quite wonderful, but I get nervous about, it would be great to get consumption down to levels that the earth could support. I'm just nervous about how we get there. I think about the disasters that would cause that, and I'm not optimistic to figure out if we're going to actually climb those steps, or climb down those steps, I guess, to get there. And that makes me itchy and scared.
Well, I mean, yes, I think part of his point is that it's not going to be pleasant necessarily for people who are consuming too much to shift to consuming, unless in a sense of just like, well, I would like to have more things personally, but like, that it will have economic impacts that.
But I think there's a difference between not pleasant and like economic impacts that we can manage and mitigate. And he talks about this in the epilogue a little bit.
Right.
Obviously, I just finished reading the book today, so I'm relying heavily on my most recent memory. But like, he discusses like, these are things that we can do to reduce the impact of job loss. You know, give everyone money, easy peasy. Although that does kind of counteract the entire chapter, where he's like, money flowing around is actually just part of the problem.
Yeah. So if you want to consume less, try having less money.
Try having less capitalism.
Yeah, but I mean, the other thing, like, I think this is what you were saying. It's like, I wish there were more examples, like in the epilogue of the pricing close. Like, if we priced everything to include the costs of the environmental destruction it created, then ethically made clothes that are usually much more expensive, it's, you know, not, it makes it hard for those companies, one, to stay afloat, because most people are like, I'm not going to pay that much for a shirt, even if it is, you know, made better. But if you then, you know, price things from Shein accordingly to, you know, the labor costs and the environmental destruction and all of that, then pretty quickly you're looking at similar prices. It's just that we externalize all of the environmental costs out of our consumer goods. And so if we didn't do that, and we were paying as much for things as they cost our environment, then we would sort of downshift our consumption because everything would be more expensive.
Yeah, it's like using the economy as the driver, which I guess would be a little bit lighter landing than just the economy's bottom falling out if we chose to implement a carbon tax, which is a rife political issue, but not only a carbon tax, but like a human rights tax and stuff like that. I think David's making some good points, though.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult when you are telling a government to regulate what people can consume. Like, that doesn't seem like the right solution either.
Right. Right. And I think then that's where like that it's not internalizing, but not externalizing. What would you call that?
Not externalizing the cost of things, or
right. It wouldn't be internalizing the cost of things.
Wait, I don't totally understand what you're trying to say.
Okay, so what's the opposite of externalizing the cost?
Like, what's the opposite of an externality?
Yes.
Subsidizing, right?
No. So like the thing of pricing a shirt according to
the costs that are associated. That's including the externalities in the price.
Yes. So just including the externalities.
Currently, we are subsidizing.
Yeah, I was just looking for the word, but it's including the externalities.
Oh, okay.
I was like, it's not internalizing or internalities. I'm just like, how do I say this? How do I express this thought of what we're not doing, which is including the externalities?
Yes.
So I think that, doing that is a way that you regulate consumption, but not in a sense of like, you have, I think, there's a chapter in here, or no, is there a chapter in here? Where did I see this? This was Alina Norm's YouTube video where, was it? Somebody was talking about like the, World War II, like tickets of like, you can buy this much fabric, right?
Like rationing stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that there are people who are voluntarily using these like vintage ration books to figure out, all right, here's how much fabric I would be buying in the 40s, and that's how much fabric I'm going to buy now, to try to use that as sort of like a rubric to limit my own consumption.
Huh. Although, didn't they also use like flour bags for clothes and rice bags and stuff? So they were...
Right, but what they were saying is like, and that's like a reuse situation. So they're like, all right, here's how I will, arbitrarily ration my own consumption. Right. So including the externalities would be an alternative to saying like, all right, here's your book of tickets of how much stuff you can buy. Because then that is a little bit weird and like, I don't know, people wouldn't handle that well.
No.
Turns out the US doesn't handle policy changes well in general. But that like, you use your own budget as you do now to choose what you buy and don't buy, but that you're not allowed to shift the costs to another community that is going to be more harmed just because you want to have more outfits.
I have another question for you.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the author's answer to this would be, but it kind of goes back and forth between consumption being cultural and consumption being an innate concept. And I don't think comes down, he's got a lot of good examples of like, there are many, historical examples of communities that, if they get too much wealth, they find a way to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Because they recognize this like greedy nature in humans.
Yeah.
Do you think it's purely just like the cultural trappings of what the world we're living in, or do you think people are inherently kind of like more, giving more shiny toys?
I mean,
tell me.
I have no idea what's going on with the wiring here. So it's like, far be it for me to say, obviously, like I've made that video recently about how like the pandemic triggered this like, not hoarding because it's not hoarding, but like a little squirreling away impulse in me of like, oh, I got to prepare for winter. I got to store away my little acorns, my little dried beans in that cabinet. And yeah, I think that there's maybe something about like we feel precarious and bad, so we gotta like prepare ourselves.
Mhm.
And even that, like as people said in the comments of that video, isn't necessarily negative. Like there are certain ways where like being prepared for as we learned with the pandemic, being prepared for not being able to go to the store for 2 weeks or whatever is probably wise.
Yeah.
Panic buying toilet paper enough for like 2 years, probably not wise.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, I think that there's a little bit of, you know, just like animal brain in us that's like, yeah, I got to be prepared for lean times.
Mhm.
But also that's way overpowered, I think, by cultural forces.
Yeah.
It's just like taking that and just like ratcheting it up.
Mhm. Rewarding those little dopamine centers. Be like, yeah, this makes you feel good. Okay, that's a good answer.
Yeah, because it's like yes, of course I want to do that with food. That makes sense to do.
Mm-hmm.
Do I need as many lipsticks as I have? That's not. I could have 0 lipsticks and survive. You know, like I don't think that there's anything like evolutionary about. I mean, I don't know. You could say things about like pretty bird feathers, but like it's silly. It's silly. This is just a thing because I saw a lot of YouTube videos where people had a lot of lipsticks, and I thought, should I have more lipsticks?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I know just enough about like human evolution to be dangerous. So like, I don't know. I don't put a whole lot of stake in the like we're wired certain ways.
Yeah.
Just because there's, I'm gonna say it in a really nerdy way, like that finding the signal of it's a thing that's inherent to us from the noise of the cultural trappings and the nurture of the world that we live in.
Right. It's like we're not going to not have culture. So like, it's not that interesting to me.
Currently, our entire culture and existence is set up to sell us stuff. So
yeah,
I didn't find necessarily the example super compelling to make the argument that it wasn't culture saying more. Even though examples where we talked about they were very into sharing, it's like you still get status from sharing with people.
Yeah. Chico's saying, I do wonder a little bit about how we value status compared to material wealth in a less social context. In a context of a society that sees each other less, do they value stuff more? See, it's interesting because when I was first reading this, I read value stuff more with a completely different inflection. Like, do they value stuff more?
Mm-hmm.
So do they value stuff more? As in, I was like, oh yeah, I really feel like in trying to consume less, I am valuing my stuff more, and that like, you know, I'm taking my shoes to the cobbler. I found a great like repair shop for clothes in New York. I'm gonna make a video about this eventually, probably at the end of the year. That's like, here's everything that I have repaired this year. And so I was like, yeah, we do like it. We could value our stuff more, but I think that Chico's saying like, do we value stuff more, especially as we're kind of as we're seeing each other less. I do think that this is a big thing of like how now we all sort of posture online is like you're not like the keeping up with the Joneses is not just the people like I don't know wanting to wear the same shirt that all of the other girls in school are wearing. If you're thinking about middle school me, like, oh, I don't know, like I would like an Abercrombie t-shirt because that would make me cool. And now it's like, now I have to compete with every person with a TikTok, you know? Yeah. And so I do think that ratchets it up a little bit further, and then add to it the nightmare of like, Janelle Monáe t-shirts must be repaired. Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. Yeah, watch this inside out on cold to not ruin the graphic. But like the fact that sprinkled in with just like the regular Joneses is you have like freelance advertisers, which is what influencing is, who are consuming stuff that like professionally, you know, they're getting sent free goods to show on their videos, and that I don't think we're smart enough, even though we know that influencer is a job. I don't think that like we're really good, even adults, at distinguishing what professional advertisers consume from what individuals just living their lives consume. Like, I don't know, I watch a lot of beauty YouTube, and so you'll see with people with a whole room dedicated to makeup, and they're like, yeah, and they'll go on video and be like, yes, this is my job. It is my job to have all these kinds of makeup so I can show you this lipstick next to that lipstick if you're trying to decide which one to buy. And yet, like, I think that, you know, even though I don't have a makeup room, I have a makeup drawer, and like, I don't know, my mom has like a little pouch, you know, it's like, it kind of escalates you one step further along. And I think I've diverged from the original question, but yes, like, I think that seeing each other in person less maybe does sort of shift our sort of the way that we calibrate our consumption from the people immediately around us to literally everyone, which means that we're all kind of looking at the wealthiest, most highest consuming people and sort of being like, well, as long as I'm doing less than that, I'm okay.
I mean, I think he makes a pretty good point when he talks about, even as we've retreated into our own homes and spaces and are not seeing people as much, our homes and spaces are being seen by people outside so much more. Like, historically speaking, you would only see into the homes of the uber wealthy when they, you know, donated their house to become a museum, right? Like, you weren't there. I can take a picture of my dog and put it on the internet, and suddenly everyone knows what my carpet looks like or whatnot, you know?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so,
that we didn't used to see the inside of people's fridges unless we were invited over to their home for a party.
Yeah.
And now, like, having an organized fridge is a genre of content.
It's like, what are people going to think when you open your pantry? How organized is it?
Yeah.
And like, have you bought all the right little containers to organize your food that was already in a container?
Right. There's a great episode of the podcast Never Post, which is made by some friends of ours, that talks about the inside of cars as a space that is becoming like optimized visually in the way that, you know, 5-10 years ago, when people were filming videos inside their bedroom, sort of the amount, you know, the level of to which you would decorate your bedroom like a film set. This was literally the set of Crash Course Linguistics. We wouldn't have otherwise bought this wallpaper. But, you know, that kind of had the bar raised as people were filming the inside of their bedrooms. And now, as the inside of a car becomes a really popular location for people to film a TikTok, people are like decorating the inside of their cars. And that pointing a camera at something suddenly means that now you're thinking about how other people perceive it, even if it's a place that we wouldn't have otherwise expected to be seen or expected to be on display. Yeah, so Never Post is the podcast.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, because the other thing that Chico's original point made me think of is a section that I think was very much a figment of, not figment, like became a part of the book because of when it was being written and published in 2021.
Yeah.
Talking about digital purchasing. It seems like this book was written in the middle of the pandemic, before NFTs. But
well, before NFTs like rose and fell.
Right. Yeah. Before that entire boom and bust cycle of NFTs, because he seems very optimistic about the premise of like, what if we like went for that little squirreling away consumption inherent idea that we may or may not have and used it for buying little digital goods. And I'm like, I wonder if he could go back and edit that and he would be like, maybe not so much the NFT thing.
Maybe less that.
Yeah. But I think what maybe just because we've been online for so long, I found the section that you talked about that very strange. And I'm trying to remember, I had a point and it's like evaporated as I tried to talk about it. But basically, I think that as we went online more during the pandemic, especially the beginning parts of the pandemic, at least my understanding of, while there was an initial drop in consumption in like going to stores, you know, people were suddenly buying. He talks a little bit how they started, you know, he talks about Swift, which I think is fun, the biking app.
Yeah, but everyone was like, I'm going to reinvent myself in lockdown. And so I'm going to buy all of the requisite items that I need for this new hobby.
Yeah, and everyone who went remote is buying desks and chairs and all this other stuff. And I don't know, I can't imagine that balanced out well.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you covered that.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about that, like all of the different kind of categories that people were consuming, you know, during the early days of the pandemic, because it's still happening.
Still happening, folks.
And also like talking about like what if we shifted from physical consumption to digital consumption, and like my feeling about all of this is like you can never replace one category of consumption with another, because you're just going to introduce another category.
Right.
And the reason that I say this is just because like I feel like, again, I'm going to draw a beauty example because this is just like the content genre that I'm most mired in, that like, well, I don't know, I feel like people would expect it now, but people like might not have expected it from me because it's not the kind of content I make.
I see.
Is that like this has been a huge thing for beauty companies over the past several years, is they like, because it's a really high margin business, it doesn't take a lot of capital to produce makeup and skincare and hair care and whatever, but you can sell it for a lot more than that, and so you make a lot of money. Which is why all those celebrities launched beauty brands in the past several years. But like one tactic is that they always invent new categories. So like, I don't know, when I was like a teenager and first getting into makeup, you know, you would buy your mascara and your eyeshadow and your lipstick or whatever. But there wasn't scalp serum. There wasn't, you know, like we had lip gloss, but we didn't have lip gloss and lip oil, which are the same thing, but they call them different things so that you can have different categories to buy them under.
Lip oil before. Oh, no.
Really? I have some. but you know, having a body serum was not a category. And then they were like, well, people use face serums. I bet we could sell them body serums, right? So like, a way to sell more product is to come up with a different kind of product and be like, well, have you considered including this in your routine? And something that I'm trying to do in my own consumption is be like, no, we're not doing new categories. You can't just invent a new kind of thing that didn't exist before and tell me that I always needed it. And so for me, like, I think about this with fashion too, is like, people are like, yeah, well, we could not overproduce clothes and you could buy digital fashion and show your little digital outfits on your Instagram avatar or whatever. I'm like, I think people are just going to buy digital clothes and physical clothes. Yeah. I don't think it's going to replace one category. I mean, like, that's a very optimistic thought, but I just think that it's going to be another type of thing to buy.
I mean, I can totally see once you have your little Instagram avatar that you can get dressed, and then there's another app which helps you find real versions of the clothes that you dressed your Instagram one in, so you can buy and so you can match it.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is terrifying.
Yeah.
And it would definitely happen. Well, I think we need and because like the thing that you just described, you find a new category in which to sell is like business school 101. We need like everything they teach in business school and how to not do that, or how to recognize it and immediately counteract it in your own life. Anti-business school.
I think the origin story of my entire vibe right now is perhaps that I was an advertising major for one semester of college and was like, I gotta get the fuck out of here. Because basically I was like, I wanna be like a graphic designer, and how do you get paid for that? You make ads, you design ads. And then I learned about how ads work, and I thought it was gross. So yeah, I think they mention like Naomi Klein's no logo, and they mention like, I feel like I had an Adbusters phase in college where it's like, you learn about advertising tactics, and you
I've got Cradle to Cradle, and I've got this changes everything, but I don't have no logo on the shelf.
And you try to learn about the tactics so that you can spot them and resist them and be like, hey, this is what they're doing to me right now. They're appealing to this insecurity. But yeah, it's I don't think that the way forward is necessarily to just like replace one kind of consumption with another kind of consumption. Yeah. Actually, that brings me to the point where another thing that I thought was really useful was where he's talking about that like community center in England where they have like free programming every day. I'm like, I want to quit my job and start one of those.
Did he ever say how it exists? Like that's the whole thing I was waiting for. Is like it seems amazing.
How is
How is it funded? Like they are hiring people. These are free classes.
Yeah,
How?
that's
How
a good
work?
question.
But
But
I
I
just
think,
missed that. I might have just missed
and
it.
it might have been like, I think people might like volunteer to like host the programming, but like
Mhm.
still somebody's
But
like
it's still
making
got
the
to.
schedule.
They're
right?
still building. People are still getting. People had jobs there.
Yeah,
But I think that that's like a service the government should provide. That's what our taxes should be paying for.
but in any case, I liked that as an alternative for like, well, what should we like? I think the wrong question, and I see this also in like fashion circles all the time. It's like, okay, fast fashion is bad. Like, what should we buying? Is like the wrong question.
yeah.
But like that was a really good answer to like, well, what should we do if we're not consumers? And like, oh no, it looks like it shut
ended
down
in
in 2023.
Oh no.
Well, that's not fun to find out live on stream.
Yeah.
We're like, yeah, this is the answer. But the answer, well, they did publish all their research on it and like post resources. But yeah, the point is not that we just find like the correct things to consume,
Mm-hmm.
but it's that we find different ways to relate to each other. And one of those ways that he framed in the book was being a participant rather than a consumer. Because I think so often the alternative is offered as like, oh, well, we should create. And then it's like, okay, well, then we all, I don't know. I'm very irked by the whole thing of like people being like creators. And it's like, you're just an ad person. Like you just make ads.
You're just making ads.
There's creating art and then there's creating ads. And those are different things.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I also really resonated with the participatory city idea because almost all the other examples are taking stuff away. And like, while I agree with you that you can't change consumption by just adding another consumption category, and I kind of bristled at the framing of like, oh, choosing experiences over things is worse. But like not all experiences are worse. And he did counteract himself almost immediately after saying that and being like, buying camping gear is a good thing because you're not going to have as many emissions. I'm like, I think you can spend a lot of money on camping gear.
Yeah.
B, it's like, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to have a less dense emissions and impact from going on a camping trip. But I do think there are ways to choose experiences and interaction and community in ways that are not consumptive. Like, if there's anything that I learned in early pandemic is like one of my favorite ways to hang out with friends is walking around the botanical garden, or walking around Central Park. And that requires no money and just some sunscreen, which is a consuming and thing, but like, that's okay. I think we got to stay healthy.
Yeah. But yes, that was a really big shift for me too, is because I started, going on park walks with people as like a relatively safe outdoor activity that we could do. And then, it didn't feel like the only way to see people is, oh, let's go get drinks. Let's go get dinner in New York. That can run you $50, $100 easy.
Yeah.
And so it actually, I feel like, made me see people more because I wasn't worried about, okay, do I still have budget for this month? Because you can just walk. And I think also it broke us out of patterns. I don't know. I feel like you can have a really good conversation. We find this with each other too, right? It's like, rather than sitting down face to face and being like, let's talk. What do you think about the world? Is that if you're just like outside moving and sort of, and people feel the same way about road trips. I just hate road trips because I get car sick and I hate cars. But like that you can have better conversations with people when you take the pressure off of like, and now we sit down and we look into each other's eyes and we talk about the world. It's just like, it happens naturally as a consequence of the other activity that you're doing together. So yeah. And I think that in the same way, this, community center example is you show up because you want to learn how to, I don't know, can vegetables or make coffee. I was looking at their, past workshops, but then you end up just talking to people and getting to know each other in the course of doing this other thing. And that also sort of feeds back into having a less consumptive society because, okay, now you know your neighbors and now you can go, okay, you went to a sewing class at the community center. well, I don't have a sewing machine and I don't sew enough to need one by myself. But if I wanted to just mend something quick and I know my neighbor has a sewing machine, we can share these things. Or, like tool libraries and other, like, we don't need to be all owning each one of these very specific things that we don't use that frequently individually, like, 10 different copies of the same item on every house down the block.
Yeah. I mean, I live in a building with 40-ish apartments. Like, we should just have a tool library in the basement.
Right.
And I mean, we do have one ladder that the entire building shares.
This is why every time you fantasize about buying a 3D printer, I'm like, no, that is not something an individual should own. A library should have one. But yeah, it's just, but you don't get to that place without knowing and developing relationships with and trusting the people around you, that you can start to share or start to rely on each other, or start to say, hey, I can watch your kids if you can do that for me. And so we find other ways of relating to each other. And also, like I've been saying this to you, like, life doesn't have to be so hard as community, as a consumer society, like, expects it to be, or it's like, there are other ways to solve problems than purchasing something. And I think that it is hard to remember that, because that is presented to us as the best way or the fastest way to solve most of our problems. So,
I mean, I think the other, and maybe he says this and I've forgotten in the book, of the benefit of the participatory communities and being in community with people is, while I know that there are people who, like, going shopping is an activity that you do with friends, and part of that's because of, like, the collapse of public spaces, and, like, where I grew up, the only place you could hang out is the mall. But aside all of that, like, when I am hanging out with people, I am not often consuming things. Like, we are talking to each other, we are doing a thing together. I'm not, like, buying a thing. Like, the most social I am is, like, when I go to League, and all we're doing there is renting community field space. We have Ultimate Frisbee, and we have, like, plastic cones and a plastic disc for 30 people.
Yeah. And you have hours of fun.
Just chasing a toy around the field like a dog.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that is the thing you get when you're in community, is that it's an awful lot easier to just hang out and talk, perhaps share food, which is consuming something.
Yeah.
But you're not, I think he talks about this a little bit, like, when you are lonely and you need a treat, you need a pick-me-up, buying something online is really easy. And that's not a feeling I ever experience when I'm spending time with people in a joyful way.
Yeah, that's real. Yeah, that's something that as I've been trying to, like, sort out my own individual consumption habits. I've been like when you went out of town and I was having, like, a rough week, and then also our dog was sick, and it was really stressful to deal with that without help. And then I was like trying this experiment of, like, trying not to shop at all for several months. And then that's when I broke down and, like, ordered stuff because I was stressed out and I was lonely. And I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I was using this as a coping mechanism. And so, like, part of it is just trying to develop other ways to deal with your feelings. Because when you are sitting at home and, like, staring at a screen and feeling alienated and stuff, well, right there you have an ad and you can, like, go click on whatever and solve that problem real fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think that gets back to what we were saying before. Like, the ads are designed to prey on, like, a very base nature, and when you're most vulnerable is when you're most susceptible, when you're feeling like you need something more. Whereas if you can fill that need with friendship and joy and fun things, you're going to necessarily be looking for, obviously, hanging out with people that also is, you're seeing things that other people have and you're wanting those things, but it's not as deep of a desire as when you're sad and alone and in a dark room, and that's just so easy to click, Shopify something or other.
And I think that that's actually something that wasn't really discussed much in this book, but is another way that I think is useful to kind of build up your resilience against sort of using consumerism as your first resort, is, like, letting people help you. I feel like that's something that we've talked about in previous live streams, but I feel like a lot of us have the tendency to, like, oh, I don't want to be a bother, so I'm not going to ask, like, somebody to drive me to the airport, right? But I'm going to call an Uber. And so that's, like, a form of consumption, right? And there are so many new solutions for how you can avoid asking people for help, right? You could have your groceries delivered. You can call an Uber. You can get a 2-day delivery on Prime or whatever. There's all these different, you know,
You can get your medications into your home.
I used to use an app-based like when I didn't have laundry in my building, I like used an app for a while to have my laundry done. And then I stopped working in office and I was just like, let me go to the laundromat because it's so much cheaper.
Yeah.
But like, you know, you can have all of these things done. And I think that comes out of sort of this tech culture of like a bunch of, you know, young single men in San Francisco going, what's the problem that I want to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Is that I need a mommy. But that they sort of export that.
Yeah.
And then we all go, oh, great. I don't have to bother anybody. I can just pay somebody to do it. And like this faceless person in the app will bring me something. And that it's really actually, I've been trying to like challenge myself into asking for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is a couple years ago example, but like the time I got COVID, one of my friends was like, you know, can I bring you anything? And I was like, oh, well, I can't obviously go out and buy groceries because I'm sick. You know, I would like some tea and I would like some boxed mac and cheese because that would be easy to eat right now. And I could just have somebody leave it in a bag on my doorstep and order it through an app. But I'm going to ask my friend to bring it for me. And she did. And she also brought me flowers because she's a sweetie pie. And that was not actually inconveniencing her because it made our friendship stronger.
Yeah. I mean, it feels good to help people.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more insidious than that. I think not only are we trying to avoid bothering people, I think that a major like market push of these apps was to say, no, that is bothering someone.
Right.
Like I can almost remember the time where it went from like picking someone up at the airport went from being like an honor and a thing I'm excited to meet you at the airport, or I'm excited to pick you up at the bus station, to I would never ask someone to do that. That's such a weird thing. It's like, such an inconvenience. And it's like, it used to be a bigger thing. And obviously there's like security feeder nonsense, but like, it's so weird to me that became an idea of something that's such a bother.
Yeah, I feel like that's a social media discourse that happens every couple of weeks or months where it's like, you know, if you're 30, you should never ask your friends to help you move, or like, don't ask me to pick you up at the airport. Like this, like we don't owe anybody anything sort of refrain. And it's like, I've fortunately seen a lot of sort of counter examples of that. Like, no, we owe everybody everything. We owe each other care, and that's sort of an antidote to consumption. It's just like we owe each other. Like, I'm gonna help you solve this problem without having to buy something or spend money, or I'm going to lend you this, you know, thing that I have, and I'll borrow something from you, and so that we can both, you know, share these things. And as Chica's saying, like, there's an interesting synthesis between that idea and what Aja Barber mentions in Consumed of like, are these jobs better than nothing? So yeah, like the idea of like, well, you know, I don't care if somebody got paid very little to sew my fast fashion dress because they, you know, that's a good job in their country. And it's like the idea of, you know, I'm poor, I can only afford fast fashion. And it's like, all right, well, relative to the people who are making your clothes who can't afford to buy them, like, why do you think that you deserve, you know, cheap fashion more than they deserve a living wage? And that's a similar thing of like, you know,
a good example of that in the book where he talks about, he went to a producer of textiles and was like, what would you say if suddenly all of these orders dried up? And he was like, actually, it would probably be a good thing, because then we could go back, I believe it was Bangladesh. We could go back to being this like place that made beautiful fabrics that people that wanted and cared
that were
for.
Like highly sought after because, you know, there's a deep level of skill, but we can't practice that skill because we just got to go fast. Yeah. It's just like, that is a really interesting thing where it's like, I wouldn't dare ask my friend to drive me to the airport. I'm just going to have this rando do it. And be like, okay, well, what about his day? Right. You know, what about if you're inconveniencing that guy? Yeah. And so like that part of anti-consumption is like letting there be dignity in this work and have it be highly valued, and then also sort of, sharing our time and our belongings and our skills with each other rather than just sort of turning it all into cheap labor.
Yeah. I think sort of related, Zaid brought up that point earlier in that not only is it inconveniencing perhaps the person who is driving, this rideshare service you've asked for, but it's also inconveniencing everybody around you, because even though they kind of came on the scene with this beautiful utopic vision of, well, there'll be less cars because you aren't going to have to drive your car and leave it somewhere. You can just get one to come to you. Yeah. But actually it made congestion so much worse. And we live in New York City where
Uber and Lyft have my $5 million
budget shortfall.
Yeah, luxury. No, that's what a train car costs.
Sorry,
let my $5 million luxury vehicle come pick me up.
I thought you were going for the budget shortfall because we cannot get congestion pricing.
Yes. We have feelings about that. Clown mayor, clown governor. Anyway, yes, I love my luxury subway ride. But yeah, it's just and David's talking about the problem of fast fashion waste ending up in thrift stores. Yeah, that just that's another thing that's not covered here, but just sort of the other end of overconsumption is sort of the the waste that all creates and the ways that we sort of cast that off and it's not our problem, and we think oh yeah, I'll just donate this helping somebody, and it's well, if you didn't want to wear that, why do you think that that's good enough for somebody else?
Yeah, you're just adding further pollution and then further emissions to deal with your waste down the line.
Yeah,
pipeline metaphor.
But that now circles back to the original thing that Chico was saying that I misread of valuing stuff more or valuing stuff more.
Yeah,
and that's to me obviously the book ends up with this conclusion of you changing your individual consumption patterns is not what I'm asking for here. I'm asking for us to make sort of broader societal shifts, but something that I am trying to do in my individual life is not just to buy less stuff, which I am working on, but also treat the stuff that I have with a lot more respect, and just making sure that I repair things or that I take care of my shoes and my clothes and my whatever from the beginning so that it doesn't need to be repaired as quickly or doesn't fall apart, or that it would be good enough for me to pass it on to somebody else when I'm done with it because I've maintained it in a good condition.
Yeah. I think it's also he sort of talks about this, but the repairing of your stuff also allows for the continuation of an economy that's not based on consumption. So a cobbler, while they are consuming some additional materials if you go get your shoe resoled, but it's only the sole of the shoe. And if it's a local cobbler, they can buy the, X number of yards of it and they can trace it so it's not wasting very much in a way that big productions of shoes won't, because they're just stamping them out. So you are investing in a local economy, if we're still going to be stuck in this capitalistic framework, repairing your stuff and bringing it to spaces near you to repair them is consuming in a much less harmful way.
And allows for a mitigation of some of that economic impact.
Yeah.
Think about that.
Because if you don't, they go out of business also.
Yeah, the tailor shop or the repair shop that we go to now, and I will tell you they are charging a premium because they do really cool and interesting and unique work. I had a dress altered and then they embroidered all this cool stuff on the side. Now nobody else has a dress like that. That's so cool. But that business needs enough people to be willing to pay to have something repaired instead of replaced to continue to exist.
Yeah, I mean, you often see this argument online when you have a pair of shoes that is, I'm using shoes just because that's the first thing in my head, that are, say you have $150 pair of shoes that you bought and you're I'm going to keep this for a while. And it's a good pair of shoes. And part of why you bought it is because you can repair it. But if you take it to these local places, the repair costs over a few years, it could be the same as you bought that. You could buy the new shoe.
Shoes resold, it was $60.
Right. I got my sandals resold and those are $70 shoes when I really bought them. And every time I get them resold, it's another $60. So like I theoretically could buy a new shoe every time and it would cost the same to me.
Yeah.
But there are so many other benefits of doing that repair. And I think that when you go online, people are like, well, you could just buy a new one. You wait for a sale and you get one for $50. Then you've actually saved money.
Yeah.
But you're not getting any of those externalities.
Yeah, and also you don't have a long-term friendship with your pair of shoes.
I mean, I am deeply attached to them. So
I have a leather jacket that's like an emotional little safety blanket. And I just got a bunch of cool patches sewn on it. And it cost more than the jacket cost. But yeah, we are now at the time to end our stream. So is there anything else that you wanted to say that we didn't get to?
Here, let me look at my notes.
Okay. While you look at your notes, I want everybody to know that the next live stream is on August 2nd, 5 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be reading a book called The Ugly History of Beautiful Things by Katy Kelleher. And I will be joined by Evelyn from the Internets, which I'm really, really excited about.
Woo!
And I'm looking at my computer, not your computer or the camera. August 2nd, Evelyn from the Internets, The Ugly History of Beautiful Things. I hope you join us. If you want reminders and information and how to find the book and all that stuff, if you at somewhere in the links below, there is a link to join my Patreon at the free tier. You do not have to be a paid member to get Hopepunk Book Club updates. I will send them to you there. All right. Any other thoughts that you had?
Darcy's here.
Oh yeah. Should we show Darcy?
Does anyone want to see Darcy?
Yeah. The people yearn for the Darcy. She's supposed to sleep.
He's very sleepy.
Oh, little groan.
This is our shared dog. And she does consume.
She does consume. And she doesn't really think critically about the things she consumes. I can tell you
She
that.
doesn't really think
Critically about anything.
Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I really enjoyed this discussion. If you want to hear more about consumption, climate change, all those things, Miriam and I just made a video together. I uploaded it last night. You may not have even seen it. I'm sure it's lurking in your Watch Later playlists. But you can check that out, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts there too. All right, everybody have a great weekend. Stay cool, and I'll see you next month with Evelyn on August 2nd. Bye.
Bye.